Hey everybody, it's Fight Club Hubs. Welcome to an all-new episode of GVN Live. We're gonna kind of free-flow it today, kicking it back a little, relaxing, having fun. Sorry we couldn't do our show last week, shit happens. So with me today is, of course, as always, Jan and Mr. Mark B. Writing. How are you two today? Start with you, Jan.
I'm kind of jonesing right now because I had to wait. Everyone else is like, oh, by the way, Destiny 2 Forsaken came out today. I have to wait. So, it is what it is. I'm just, waiting it out. Finish this and off to shoot land, because that's what I'm doing after this.
Mm-hmm. And Mr. Mark B. Writing?
I'm good.
All right, slow down there, buddy.
No, I don't really have anything to say. I'm waiting for Spider-Man to come out.
Waiting for Spider-Man and playing with the ship waifus.
Yeah.
I keep getting that fucking ad on my phone when I'm searching Facebook. That is so annoying.
Maybe you should play it then.
It's a good game.
I mean, anime game with big tits and lollies. I don't know about that.
Look. There's not that many lollies.
I don't know, man. That
you can just ignore them.
That ad keeps showing me lollies on there, man. I'm not digging that.
Well, you can just ignore the lollies. It's fine.
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay, whatever. So, I mean, you're waiting for Spider-Man. That's pretty cool. I mean, I don't know if I'll pick it up because, I mean, the last few Spider-Man games I haven't picked up. I think the last one I played was the first Spider-Man game by Ravensoft on the Dreamcast. I don't think I played...
Good Lord, that long ago?
Well, no, I did rent and play Spider-Man 2 based on the movie for the PS2, but I wasn't really blown away by that whatsoever. It didn't really wow me.
That's arguably the best one.
Yeah, kind of is.
Maybe. Arguably, you said, though, so that's the key word right there. But, I mean, you're waiting for Spider-Man. I just got Dragon Quest XI today, and Tomb Raider comes out in just a couple of weeks, so my wallet's going to be crying for a while.
I mean, that's fair.
Yeah. I got Monster Hunter last week. I don't know where all this time is going, and I got Shenmue 1 and 2 the week before.
That sounds like a you problem.
It is a me problem. I don't know what to do with myself. I got no time to play shit.
Oh, that's what PTO is for, man.
Yeah,
I know personal time off is a good thing, but I try to space mine out. Okay, so let's we got a couple topics. The first one is actually kind of focused. The second one, not so much. We're going to probably go everywhere with it. First topic is we're going to be talking about Microsoft's Ybarra calling out Sony. I learned about this recently thanks to Rich from Review Tech, who shared his opinion on it. But this is a thing that's been going on for about a few years now. People have been wanting crossplay for the PlayStation 4 for a while now, and Microsoft has been, open to it. Nintendo is open to it, although in what capacity I'm not sure once their Nintendo Online service goes live later this month. But Sony has been candid pretty much by saying, we're not interested. But they kind of lie about it by saying, oh yeah, we're open to it. I mean, you got Rocket League, right? Right? Which is not really the same thing. So, Jan, sick 'em.
Fuck you.
I just saw you looking at me
No, see, okay, so this is my thought. So crossplay is inevitable. Crossplay is something that should have been done Let's see here. So, when was the last time we actually had really solid crossplay?
Rocket League doesn't count. I would say, didn't Final Fantasy XI on the 360 and the PC, were they crossplay?
No.
No? I thought
No.
they were.
Yeah, they were. They were all on the
No, they
same
weren't.
platform. Yeah, they were
they
available to all be played. Yes, they were.
The 360 version had separate servers that were separated because of Microsoft's need to keep the 4 servers they had segregated from the Sony and PC versions until 6 months before they ended the 360's life cycle.
That is not correct. I played it on the Xbox 360.
Oh dear.
So I don't remember that being crossplay compatible because I had friends who were on PC
I
and
literally
360
had
and they
I literally had a character on that the day that it became available on Microsoft Xbox 360. I tested him with the beta test, and then I played him officially.
Because I know I was on 360 and on PC, and I couldn't carry my character over. It just wouldn't let me, and it was the same play. It was the same Play Online account, and it wouldn't let me carry it over. So I don't know. Individual miles may vary. I did not have crossplay compatibility, but other people apparently did. So I don't know about that. But honestly, I think that the last really good, solid amount of crossplay that I've seen hasn't been across consoles. It's been mobile to PC. So games that were Android, games that are iOS, and games on PC have been the last time you've seen anybody really just like, yeah, you can play across each other. It's not a big deal. But when it really comes down to like the console market, when you're looking at Sony, you're looking at Xbox, and you're looking at PC, you just don't see it as often as you would think or would want. Purely in the essence of the fact that like, let's look at a recent example of a really big. Why is this a thing? Monster Hunter World. Why is this not crossplay? Why is this not cross save? Why is this not cross save?
Yeah.
First of all, they knew full well going into the concept of having a PC version of Monster Hunter World that having the ability to carry your character over from your console to your PC is something everyone wanted. And they didn't do it. And it's not on Capcom. It's purely on the essence of the fact that the console market didn't want the crossplay with the PC market, which makes zero sense because, let's be honest, Microsoft, why are they not compatible? That makes no sense to me. Other than the fact that I think the 360 version is the lowest selling of the 3 versions regardless, and I think the PC version's actually sold more than the Xbox 360 or the Xbox One version has, and it's been out for almost a year already. So what's going on with that? That would have been a great game to have crossplay on, even if it wasn't cross-save. Crossplay on that would have been fantastic. So why that isn't a thing, I don't know. I'm really trying hard not to talk about PUBG and Fortnite. I'm really trying not, because we all know that that's a thing, and we all know that that's a problem. We all know that's going to be a continuing problem, especially with Fortnite, because it is as popular as it is. PUBG is PUBG, and it will always whatever. And Fortnite is whatever. Battle Royale as a genre is whatever. I get it. It's fun for, every once in a while. It's fun to be able to just roll in, talk with your friends, shoot people, try to make as tall of a tower as you possibly. I don't know. It's like the weirdest game of shotgun Jenga I've ever seen in my entire life. So it's like, whatever, right? Mm-hmm. But when it really comes down to it, it's like we understand that there's a need for it, and why that need isn't being met, and why Sony, of all people, who know that their console is powerful and know that their console has the market share. Why is it not able to talk, even if it's just PC? Why is that not actually a thing?
Because Sony's winning.
That doesn't mean anything.
I'm sure it's capable of doing it because it's based off of, what is it, a Linux-based backend? They could very easily put the technology in place to allow it to happen.
Oh, sure.
They're just absolutely 0% interested in putting the work in because they're winning. They don't give a shit.
Right, but that's the thing. PC is PC and has probably 10 times the market share and 10 times the player base. So why wouldn't you want your console player base being able to mesh with the PC player base? There's a reason why games like Call of Duty and Battlefield do better on PlayStation than they do on Xbox and PC. Because they know that there isn't crossplay. Because people can play on this instead of this. And if that people who are playing on a controller have to play people who are playing on a keyboard and mouse are going to bitch and complain and never buy the game again. So they know that this is a catered experience to the people who are good with a controller, and I'm not knocking them, but let's be honest, aim assist is a thing, and like this whole convoluted mess of what you use to interface with your gaming platform needs to just stop, because it's dumb. Because all it's doing is making people be like, well, I want a game on my computer, but all my friends are on PlayStation, or all my friends are on Xbox, so I don't need both. That's just a lot of extra money that I'm not willing to spend or can't afford to spend, because I can throw down $350 for a console, or I can spend $1,000 on a gaming PC.
But, Mark, what are your thoughts on just the fact that Sony blatantly, lies about their interest in cross-play, even though we all know that they're just not going to do it anytime soon? What is your thoughts on that? Like, why do they keep doing this?
Because they're winning.
Well, we get that, but, like...
So there is nobody to hold Sony accountable. Like, this is the thing. Video gaming as an industry, video gaming as a form of entertainment, whatever, very desperately exists in these two separate and uniquely fucked environments. On one side of things, video gaming incredibly, deeply, fundamentally wants to be taken as seriously as every other form of media. And we see this in every single gesture that is performed by gaming. That's why Geoff Keighley, aka the Dorito Pope, is a person who exists that we are aware of. Because
I love that
video
nickname, by the way.
wants to present itself. Video gaming wants to present itself as being legit. So you have DJ Khaled showing up at Blizzard events when the fan base is like, I don't care about this guy. I will never care about this guy. Get him the fuck out of here. That's why you have video game developers and manufacturers cravenly trying to get mainstream acceptance. It's the worst thing. But on the other side, they as an industry don't want to actually behave in the same way as the industries whose fame they are chasing. So you get into these awkward positions where they don't want to release actual sales numbers for things, where they don't want to release actual measurable metrics to shareholders, where we don't know so many of the things that we would know if it were, Paramount or Universal Studios, because they don't have to. So, bringing it back to Sony here, Sony doesn't have to actually do anything with crossplay because there is nobody to hold them accountable. Games journalism has been essentially left to hang because they are deeply beholden to the game manufacturers, and anytime they get into a position where they try to confront or call out game manufacturers in any capacity, you get the band of craven dipshits who show up decrying it as fake news and talking about what beta cucks all game journalists are. It's fucked. And because games journalism is basically toothless and throatless, there's nobody to hold Sony accountable to this shit. And it's not like the gaming base is going to do anything about it. They're just going to slob on Sony's cock because that's what they fucking do. Sorry, not sorry. And they're just going to deal with it. They're just going to do it. They're not going to stop buying the games. They're not going to do anything about it. They're just going to be like, oh, well, this sucks. It's a shame that we can't actually hold Sony accountable to this, even though we totally fucking can. Hey, here's the next exclusive game that I'm going to buy. Woohoo. And the cycle will continue forever.
That was so elegantly put, Mark. Thank you.
I've had a lot of time to think about it because it's been going on for well over a decade at this point.
Mm-hmm. So, do we finally see crossplay between all three major console manufacturers, let's say, with the next console generation, or will Sony finally buckle at some point in this generation? Jan?
I don't know. That's rough. That's like really hard to say because I can't really say that one way or the other at this point. I don't know.
Or do you think that Sony might never buckle whatsoever?
I don't know about that. I think that it's yes and no. I think that if Sony finally gets pressured into understanding that what's actually going to happen is that people are going to leave for the consoles that do offer crossplay, regardless of quality, it's the steel is heavier than feathers argument. They're both the same, but technically steel is heavier than feathers, so no one really knows. It's hard to say, and I honestly think that the answer to that is both yes and no. And the reason I say that is because yes, eventually we're going to have crossplay, but no, it's not going to be in this console generation, and it may not even be in the next console generation. As long as Sony can provide the knowledge that their console is doing better than the other consoles, because let's be honest, they think there's still a console war going on, then yeah, they're going to keep doing whatever is best for their business, not what's best for business. And let's be honest, we already know that that phrase is fucking terrible. Because it doesn't mean anything good ever comes of it. You know what I'm talking about.
Okay, any final words or thoughts that anybody want to share before we, move on to the fun topic of conversation? Mark?
I guess this means that in this analogy, Sony is Roman Reigns.
Wow.
Oh boy.
At least the PlayStation can actually sell itself.
Oh, damn.
I said Roman Reigns, not Brock Lesnar.
Hot take.
All right. Well, thoughts on crossplay done and over with. Let's get into the fun, free-flowing topic of conversation. We're going to talk about the good old era of 16-bit gaming. We'll probably talk about some of our favorite games and pick and choose and compare, the consoles, pretty much primarily being the Super Nintendo and the Sega Genesis, the Sega CD, 32X doesn't count, fuck that shit. So, in a little bit of a retrospective, Mark and me grew up having the Sega Genesis. What did you primarily grow up with, Jan?
Super Nintendo.
You had the Super Nintendo, okay.
Well, that's what I got bought. I was 8.
Now, be it as it may, we are obviously the generation of people who, even though we grew up and our first gaming consoles were either the Atari, ColecoVision, or the NES, the systems that we use, the consoles that pretty much transcended us into like hardcore gamers, were straight up the Super Nintendo and the Sega Genesis era, because that is part of when the big major console war of gaming began. The big edict arguments going on there. Genesis does what Nintendo don't, or now you're playing with superpower, all that, bullshit. A lot of great games came out from that era. A lot of great franchises, got really well established then. And for me on the Sega Genesis, some of those great franchises that I really enjoyed, with the Streets of Rage, which is great to see, the fourth game is finally coming after like a decade and a half of, purgatory, because I believe Sega was trying to resurrect it back on the original Xbox, but they canned it. The Phantasy Star franchise, the Lunar franchise on the Sega CD, Sonic the Hedgehog, of course, a lot of other great games like some of the Konami offshoot games like Rocket Knight and all that. Like a lot of great games that I enjoyed on the Genesis. Unfortunately for me, I couldn't say that I was a big Super Nintendo person growing up. I mean, I played it at friends' houses or at the YMCA or whatever, which had a game room, because I didn't own a Super Nintendo until about 10 years ago when I went to my first video game convention. I bought one for like $50. How about we share some stories and whatnot? Mark, how about you start off with some of your stories about Genesis? When did you get it? How did you get it? What were your thoughts initially as a young Mark B. writing?
Well, I got the Genesis the Christmas after it came out.
Wow, so 1988 or 1989, I forget.
One of those, I don't remember.
Yeah.
When I was a little kid, the first console I ever had was the Odyssey 2.
Holy shit.
Yep.
Wow.
And that died on me, like right within the first year that the Master System came out. So my mother got me that. And I was such a big fan of that she got me the Genesis when it came out. The games that I got with it, aside from the first cartridge that it came with, which was Altered Beast, Jesus Christ, was Alex Kidd and the Enchanted Castle, because I was a big fan of Alex Kidd growing up. World Cup Soccer, I believe it was called. It's like something soccer it was. I don't understand what my mother's belief was that I liked sports games in any capacity.
Was it the Tecmo one?
No, it was the Sega one.
Okay.
She got me that, Pat Riley Basketball, Thunder Force 2.
There's a good game.
Truxton.
Oh, do you still have Truxton?
Not the physical copy of it, no.
Because that's Classic Game Room Guy's favorite game. He talks about it like at least once every episode.
It's fine. I don't hate it. I think that was it. She also got me Joe Montana Sports Talk Football at some point later on down the line. And oddly enough, like, those were all fine games. Like, I could never get into the Madden games, but Joe Montana 2, Sports Talk Football, Pat Riley Basketball, and the Sega Soccer were all entirely playable and enjoyable for what they were.
Mm-hmm.
She also got me the Power Base Converter, which was the thing that you could plug into your Genesis that would let you play all of your Master System games. Which Nintendo never bothered to do an SNES converter because they were winning. What did they care?
Well, they did have plans for one, but they canceled it.
Yeah, because they were winning. They didn't need it. What did they care? It wasn't going to increase their sales. Oops. Yeah.
Yep.
But anyway, so yeah, it's just I just had a shitload of games when it started, and then I would just, like, my mother would just periodically get me new games to just keep me busy while she worked 2 jobs, more or less. So it would be, you know, Shining Force, or The Revenge of Shinobi, or Shinobi Shadow Dancer, or Sonic the Hedgehog, or whatever. Like, there's a lot of different memories that I have of the game, but it's kind of like tied to stuff growing up.
Mm-hmm.
Like a friend getting the Ghostbusters platformer that came out, and then there was a big hurricane that came through that, like, tore down his back fence. So, like, we were off from school that day, so we'd all decided to hang out together, and we just spent the day beating the Ghostbusters game. Or him renting the original Sonic the Hedgehog and us just taking turns, like, trying to get through the first stage over and over again until we could, you know, get to the first and the second, and then eventually the third before the rental copy had to go out. Or discovering, you know, the secret code for Target Earth that allowed you to actually be able to play the goddamn thing. And then like basically in invincibility mode, and then, like, actually going through the whole thing in a day. Or, like, my one friend who was, like, getting really big into the idea of making music when he was in his teenage years, actually remixing video game music by way of, like, playing sound effects while he was recording the music, like the sound test, onto a tape, and then, like, using that to, like, sort of create his own weird remixes. It was very strange.
So pretty much it's not so much the games themselves that you have strong memories of. It's the stuff that's associated with a lot of these games, that, like, something that, like, happened around it.
Yeah, I mean, like, the 16-bit era is not necessarily one where you're going to have a lot of memories about your experiences with the game so much, I don't think, because this is still before the point where heavy narrative development was a thing.
Mm-hmm.
So you're going to kind of end up in a situation where, you'll remember the games, you'll think they're great, but you're not going to have, like, the kind of crazy stories that you might have about Grand Theft Auto, or the remembrance of certain narrative elements that you might with something like, maybe Phantasy Star 4 or Final Fantasy 6, but more likely something like a Suikoden or a Final Fantasy 8 or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I remember really liking Snatcher. I remember really liking The Amazing Spider-Man versus the Kingpin. I
just picked that up recently.
Yeah, it's still a good game. I remember really liking Sonic CD. I remember being really fucking frustrated with Spider-Man and the X-Men Arcade's Revenge.
Oh God.
Yeah, it's just like, but it's not the same kind of memories that we have about, more modern games that have a little bit more freedom mechanically to create crazy sorts of internalized self-narratives, I guess.
Yeah. Well, Jan, let's go ahead with you. I mean, tell us about your experience. I mean, did you have a Genesis too, or did you just only have a Super Nintendo growing up?
So, when it really came down to it, so my very first console was an old Atari XE, the computer/gaming one.
Mm-hmm.
So it had the built-in keyboard and the built-in games on the RAM and everything like that. And I played that and I had that for a while because my parents were like, "We're not getting you a Nintendo. We're not getting you a console. We don't need you playing video games. We want you to be outside." This, that, and it's like, I grew up an only child on a cul-de-sac full of retirees and old people. So I didn't really go out much. And when I did, it was by myself or when my friends who were almost always on the other side of town were brought over by their parents and we did stuff together outside. So a lot of what I did when I got the chance to do it was when I got a computer, which was really what brought me into gaming in the first place, was actually I had an old Insight 8088. And the very first game I ever actually played outside of Pac-Man and Missile Command was Battletech on DOS 2.0. That was my very first actual game. But a couple of years later, Super Nintendo comes out and Game Boy, the original brick-ass Game Boy, come out, and my parents are like, all right, fine, whatever. So they got me a Super Nintendo, and I had that. I got that with Super Mario and Pilot Wings, F-Zero. Gosh, I don't remember a lot of earlier Super Nintendo games. I had it for a while. I played a lot, but it was around the time when I started understanding that you could still rent. This was back in the day where you could still rent video game systems. Like, you could actually still rent consoles from Blockbuster or
Hollywood
King
Video
Soopers or whatever.
Yeah.
So we would go and I would rent a console. My dad would use his card and I would get a Genesis. Because all of the games that I actually liked and that I wanted to play were on Genesis. So, Gunstar Heroes and Rocket Knight Adventures and Sonic CD and Lunar and Bram Stoker's Dracula and Microcosm, Dark Wizard. Seriously, Sega was my jam. I liked the Super Nintendo and it was fine for what it was, but I never really owned games. I would always just rent stuff. I never really bought games. But for some reason, just the games that were on the Genesis just spoke more to me. So the platformers that were on it, the shooters that were on it, it to me it was a better system for me. It was a system that I liked playing more on. So that was a system that I rented often, and that was what I played on. It wasn't until I was 14 or 15 before I really started getting into what Super Nintendo had to offer. And at that point, we're talking late end of the Super Nintendo's life cycle. So ass end. So Final Fantasy VI, Chrono Trigger. Oh gosh, there's a couple of others. I can't think of them off the top of my head, but like a lot of these games for me was just like the 16-bit era was sort of what got me into gaming in the first place. But like honestly, the Genesis was really where a lot of the games that I enjoyed the most in terms of just the storytelling and just the presentation of the games. To me, they just felt like it felt like there was more color, it felt like there was more action, it just felt like there was more to what the Genesis games had to offer versus what Nintendo had. Even if Nintendo was still a stronger system, the Genesis for me was just like that was the system to have. That was the system that had the games that I actually enjoyed and wanted to play and be a part of. And it really kind of struck home that I stepped away from Nintendo because I didn't own a GameCube. I didn't own a 64 because I went straight Sega. So I had, when I got the ability to start working and get my own money and get my own stuff, I went straight back and I got a Sega CD and I got all the games I wanted to play on that. And then I got a Saturn and then I bought a Dreamcast on launch. So like for me, it was all about what those systems had to offer. And that's really sort of how I was shaped. It wasn't which system is the best. It was which games are the best. And I traveled with the systems to play the games that I wanted to play. So all of the games that I wanted to play happened to be on Sega systems and then eventually on Sony systems because those were the systems that had the games that I actually wanted to play on them.
Mm-hmm. Just thinking back and listening to both your stories right here. Now, as weird as it seems, I got my Genesis late. We're talking, I got it as a birthday present in 1994. That is pretty late. That's like literally 6 years into the console's lifespan, and the system would go on and be discontinued officially in like 1998, even though a year later the Sega Saturn would drop. But around 1990 is when I started playing on the Genesis or the Super Nintendo, going back and forth. And the odd thing that led me to getting the Genesis was I went to school, in middle school at the time, and I had a couple of games with me. I had the first Tiny Toons Adventure game on the Game Boy, and I had the first Mega Man game on the Game Boy as well, and a friend wanted to borrow them, so I let him borrow them. Well, his dumbass let them get stolen. So I talked to my dad, his dad talked to his dad, and they reimbursed us the money for the game. So they gave us around like $60, $70. I forget how much the Game Boy games were worth back then. I think they were like more like $30 a pop, brand new. I'm not exactly sure, but that usually, if you guys remember this, I mean, most people back in the day, for like who wanted a game, like people who didn't have a whole lot of money, like my dad did when we were in the Army, my mom would put games on layaway. So what we did is we took that money and that I got from those two Game Boy games that were stolen, and we put it on a layaway towards a Genesis. And I got one about a couple years later, or a year later, and I actually had some games pre-bought already. One of them being the really, really horrendous the Ninja Turtles fighting game port for the Genesis. I mean, it was decent, but it wasn't the Super Nintendo version, which was actually kind of awesome. I had Sonic 2, I had Street Fighter 2 Special Champions Edition, Sonic 2, I think I said already. I had like maybe 5 or 6 games for my birthday to go with that, including, a pretty awesome version of, Star Trek The Next Generation and Ranger X, which is probably to this day one of my favorite Genesis games of all time, which I got for Christmas of that year, that I got my Genesis. But it's kind of weird because as I got my Genesis, I mean, up until I got my Genesis, I was still receiving issues of Nintendo Power at the time. My mom had me subscribe. My mom, as a birthday present back in 1990, subscribed me to Nintendo Power. And for like 4 years straight, I'm getting Nintendo Power, including during the years where the NES is practically dead at this point, and they're like, going all out. I think the last issue of Nintendo Power I ever got was when they were talking about Mega Man X2. And let's be honest, I mean, I'm looking at these awesome Super Nintendo games. I'm like, damn, man. I mean, I like my Genesis. I love the Sega CD. I have a lot of great Sega CD games. I mean, I had Soul Star, Sonic CD, and as shitty as it was, I really enjoyed Sewer Shark. I mean, those were some really fun games.
Prize Fighter.
I never got that. But
so terrible.
Yeah, and just a lot of these games were a lot of fun to play on the Genesis, but I always kept looking at the Super Nintendo and just thinking of, like, what could be. Like, I mean, I would go to a friend's house, I would play, and go to the Y, and I would be playing, like, Super Mario World, and I really loved that game. It was really awesome. I would play, Final Fight 2, or Cybernator, or Final Fantasy 3 or 6. Some of the RPGs that I kept seeing for the system, which we weren't getting on the Genesis, even though we had some great ones in the Phantasy Star series and the Shining Force series. I mean, they had games like Seventh Saga, which is a game I've been wanting for years, and I finally got one a year or two after I bought my Super Nintendo about 10 years ago, back when there was a convention in Philadelphia called the Game Expo, which was run by my friend Paul Tresca. A bunch of other games that really stood out to me on the Super Nintendo that I really wanted, besides, the Mega Man X games, 1, 2, and 3, which were awesome, and Mega Man 7, which I was just like, I mean, at first I didn't like the graphics of it because it looked way too cartoony, but then when I saw Mega Man 8, I was like, this isn't so bad.
But I don't even want to talk Mega Man 8.
Yeah. But, I mean, like, you had Seventh Saga. I mean, ActRaiser looked pretty good, 1 and 2. I mean, what was the third Ghouls or Gargoyles Quest game called? Shit. I have it downstairs in the basement, too, but it's
Firebrand's Revenge or whatever.
Something
about Firebrand.
Demon something, I think.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know why it's escaping me, but, I mean, that game looked awesome. I mean, even some of the ports that the Genesis and the Super Nintendo had comparatively, I mean, they just looked and sounded better, but honestly, they didn't play as good as their Genesis counterparts. I mean, we can really just sit here and look at, the Street Fighter 2 games and the Mortal Kombat games and any of the fighting games, with the exception of the Ninja Turtles Tournament Fighters. They played better on the Genesis, especially with the 6-button controller.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, the 6-button controller, Genesis design was great, and they improved upon it for the Saturn. I mean, and for some reason, I always felt like the games ran a little bit slower on the Super Nintendo for those fighting games, especially the first Mortal Kombat game, which I could definitely tell had, like, some pretty bad input lag. But
there was that.
There was a lot.
Specifically had a lot of problems on both consoles, but yeah, obviously Genesis was more of a direct port than the Super Nintendo. But we also already know why the Super Nintendo version was as messy as it was because that was, the ESRB, the beginning of all of that craziness really kind of hit around that point in time in the lifespan of both of those consoles.
Yeah.
The fact that the games themselves had no blood and then you had to put in a command at the title screen to get blood
ABACABB.
Nah, dude, it's all about Dullard.
Oh yeah, that code too. Yeah, Dullard.
Well, so Dullard, the Dullard was the
down,
the
up,
Genesis
left,
code.
right,
down.
A, D, yeah.
Yeah,
Down.
DULLARD.
Yeah, you do that at the title screen, I believe. In fact, that's actually probably, outside of the memories that we have, associated with the games instead of the games themselves, a lot of the stuff outside involved in the gaming world itself is also what stood out during the 16-bit era. Like you were just pointing out, the rise of the ESRB, thanks in part to, games like Mortal Kombat and what's that stupid game called on the Sega CD? It just got a re-release on the PS4 and the
Trap?
Switch. Night Trap. Even though that game was absolutely harmless, Senator Joe.
Oh no, girls in pajamas.
And they're dancing badly. But no, like we had the rise of the ESRB, and then hell, we even had some experimental things going on with the systems. Like, I mean, not just the ESRB, and we'll come back and we can talk about that in a second. But like, there's so much other stuff, like the Xband, like online gaming with your Genesis and your Super Nintendo, and even though it had like, let's say, like maybe 10 games that was compatible with it, that was like a launching point for like a platform that really wouldn't be realized for consoles for at least another several years once the Dreamcast comes out.
So about that though,
Yeah.
So I don't know how many people actually know about it, or if anybody even thought about this being a thing, but Comcast had a deal with AOL many, many moons ago back on the Genesis for what was called the Sega Channel.
Oh yeah, I was going to actually get into that, but go ahead.
It was a hard-lined connection to a database of ROMs that were hosted by Comcast and their affiliates in the time. And you would pay a flat monthly fee. I think it was like $50. It was super expensive for the day. But you had access to this massive library of games on the Genesis that were all just approved by Sega. And you would dial in like you would normally dial in with your Genesis, and it would just let you play these games on your TV whenever you wanted to. And that kind of stuff was like revolutionary for its time.
And
you didn't
Nintendo
have to download anything, but it's like... And then Nintendo's like, we're going to do it too. And then
with the satellite view.
They put it in the cartridge. They put a modem in the cartridge, and you had to plug the RJ40, fucking RJ11 into the cartridge to try to get it to connect to the... It was a shit show. It was an absolute shit show. I had never seen anything so poorly put together.
But hey, I mean, but there we go. We had digital gaming services, not fully realized, but actually being experimented on in the mid-90s with the Super Nintendo and the Genesis. Granted, they were blueprints, but still, the idea was just mind-blowing. I mean, I went to I never had the Sega Channel. I went to a friend's house who had it, and I was blown away. I would go to I would look at the menu, and I would see at least 40 to 50 games on there. Now, there was some limitations to it, however. Like, we would play Super Street Fighter 2 on there, and only half the cast was available for some reason. Like, apparently there was, in order for the game, which was actually one of the biggest to be released at the time, to be playable, it had to, like, cut the data in half or something like that in order for it to be transmitted over the modem line. I mean, it was, the game was...
Bomberman, so I don't know what you're talking about.
Yeah, I mean, Bomberman was a big cartridge too, but I don't get it. I guess Capcom was just lazy or something, or someone at Sega was lazy.
I think it was just capped bandwidth because of, dial-up connectivity. I mean, but at that time, we're talking 14.4 baud. Like, you're not going to get a lot of connectivity from multiplayer.
One of the other cool things was, I believe they had kind of like a pre-release thing going on Sega Channel. Like, you were able to play Vector Man 2 like a month before it came out, which was pretty freaking awesome. Like, you had maybe some demos of games as well. You could play, like, Weapon Lord and a bunch of other games, which were pretty cool, they're just to try out before you buy. I mean, granted, it probably hurt game sales because, oh, hey, this game sucks. I don't want to, play it.
That was the lay of the land back then, though. Like, you had no way to be able to test half these games out, so you have to basically buy the game based on what you saw on the back of the box, and if it looked cool, you bought it, and if you brought it home and it was balls terrible, you had no recourse.
Balls 3D terrible.
That was not a bad game. It was just...
Actually, I've never played it. I just went by word of mouth.
Which game was this?
Balls 3D.
Not the fighter, the platformer.
I was talking about the fighter, but...
Oh, the fighting game was garbage.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know anything about the platformer. But yeah, the fighting game was terrible.
It was Vector Man is the one I was thinking of.
Yeah, Vector Man.
Oh, no, Vector Man was fine. I don't care for it, but it's fine.
Okay.
But, like, the thing about it, though, and this is kind of where I'm, like, torn, because it's like, At the time, buying a console, playing the games on the console, it was cost effective. The systems were expensive, but so were the games. But this is also the era of games could be sold at whatever price they wanted to be. There was no regulatory AAA titles were this, indie titles
hell
were
no.
this.
Yeah, I mean, it was
Everything
all over
was
the place.
I mean, let's let.
If I recall, didn't Phantasy Star 4 come out at $90, Mark?
It was like somewhere between 90 to 100, I believe. But it was, to be fair, that one had like some egregiously large amount of storage space internal because they couldn't just put it on a regular cartridge or something to that effect.
Mm-hmm.
It was
I don't know if that's true, but that's the story that they told. So,
right. But let's also be honest that like the cost of gaming precluded your ability to actually game. It wasn't our money. 9 times out of 10, at that point in our lives, it wasn't our money.
No.
This was I want this for my birthday, I want this for Christmas, I want this for this, and hey, help me buy this game, or I'll do X amount of chores and lawn work to get that game, and your parents still bought it for you because that was the lay of the land back then.
Mm-hmm.
I want an Easter egg, I want an Easter egg, I want an Easter egg. Shut up!
Shut up, Johnny, I'll smack you upside the back of my head with my class ring.
Yeah, exactly.
No, but like, if we look at the spectrum though, and especially in that era, the 16-bit era specifically, we're missing one key player, and it's not a very popular console, and it's not a wildly popular company.
I think I know what you're going to talk about.
But no, go ahead. What do you think I'm talking about?
The TurboGrafx 16.
Oh, fuck that system. Neo Geo.
Oh, Neo Geo. Well, that was more of a 24-bit system, though.
No, it wasn't.
It was more of an arcade system.
Exactly, and that was a generality of the system. But it was out at the same time as the Super Nintendo's, like about 5 years into the 16-bit era. Neo Geo released a home console for its arcade games. There was two very key things about this system. The console was $1,000, and the carts were $100 a pop.
Yup, that's the MVS.
But the carts could actually be used on Neo Geo arcade cabinets to store and move save data. So if you owned a Neo Geo home console and you happen to have Metal Slug 2, you could pull out the cart, go to the arcade, plug your cart into the back of the system, and all of the progress that you'd had at home could be picked up at the arcade. Your high scores, your power-ups, your abilities, your unlocks for special characters that were only available on the carts for games like King of Fighters and Garou. Like, the fact that they had spent as much money, the fact that you'd have to spend that much money in the first place was kind of like, oh, your parents must make a lot of money. At the same time, you're like, oh, you must spend a lot of money. Because think of all the quarters you gotta pop in on these games. These were not easy games, even by that day's standard. Like, you look at a lot of how some of these platformers, you think about how, like, later levels of Sonic, like, let's be honest, Casino Night is fucking rough even now, okay?
Mm-hmm.
That is not an easy level, because it's just the sheer RNG of, if I go that way, am I going to hit a pinball thing and go flying off back towards the beginning of the level, or am I actually going to skim it and go through half the other part of the level? You don't know, because based on when you press the button, unless you're a speedrunner, that level's frustrating.
Yeah.
Thank you. That level's frustrating. But when it really comes down to it, Neo Geo games as a generality, SNK as a generality, those games were fucking brutal by that day's standard. In the mid-90s...
Look, let's be honest, they're still fucking brutal by now's standards.
Yeah.
I mean, it's the Dark Souls of console gaming. Anyway,
she said it. Oh, God.
But, like, think about it logically. Like, if you look at how things sort of progressed, that, like honestly, to me, SNK and Neo Geo was so fucking ahead of its time that it kind of blew my mind. When I found out about the console and how expensive it was, I'm like, I'll never have one. That's a cool idea, and I'd love to play those games, but I'll never own one. That's like not in my lifetime.
My exposure to the
Well,
Neo
to be
Geo.
fair, you can actually get those online for like pretty inexpensive. J-Rose has at various points in his life owned both a Neo Geo CD and an MVS.
Well, the
I keep
MVS
thinking about getting one,
cartridges
but I'm
are
just like,
actually
nah.
the MVS cartridges are actually really expensive to collect for. You believe it or not, it's actually cheaper if you go and you buy the arcade system, arcade cartridges, and get yourself a super gun in order to play them. Because I mean, if it comes down to a copy of Garou for the arcade platform or for the home console platform, you're looking at about a difference of maybe $300 to $400.
Well, sure, it depends. It depends on the game that you want, though. Like, you know, if you want like King of Fighters '97, you're not going to be setting a whole lot of money back for that. You know what I'm saying?
Now,
but if you want to be able to pull out,
if you want Garou, absolutely. But let's be honest, if you want Garou for the fucking Dreamcast, that's like $200.
I have one.
If you're really thinking about it logically, though, like, and most people don't, but in nostalgia, what are you gonna do? Neo Geo as a console and SNK as a company really had a interesting like marketing strategy, and how they stayed in business is beyond me. But it wasn't in the home market; it was in the arcade market, because you could pump in $20 in quarters and still not finish Metal Slug X. I'm just saying. You know, they had a genius ploy. They're like, "Hey, we got a couple of things here for you. You can either keep coming to the arcades and pumping quarters into our machines, or you could spend you could spend $1,200 and buy the game for yourself at home and not spend that kind of." Doesn't matter. You're still spending $1,200. You're gonna spend $1,200 at the arcade and actually beat it, or you're gonna spend $1,200, go home and play it and beat it, and then be like, "Damn, I got ripped off either way." But it doesn't matter, because you're still gonna buy it because the games are just that good. The art style is fantastic. The sound direction was amazing, especially on a cartridge at the time. You had actual spoken words that were not only intelligible on an arcade machine, but also on a home console. And you had the ability to basically throw down on a color scheme and a color palette that didn't just have to be, like, muted. Like, these games were not, like... SNK didn't really abide the ESRB ratings for, I think, at least 4 years after it actually happened. Like, after ESRB became an actual thing, like, in its current iteration right now, they didn't really jump I'd say jump the bandwagon, but they didn't really join on the ESRB rating system until, well, at least 4 years after, because most of those games would have all been rated M and they never would have made it to a home console. Hence the reason why they stayed in the arcades, because the arcades weren't being regulated by the ESRB. The arcades were like this last bastion of, I can do whatever the fuck I want. Because if you go and you look at some of these games, man, it's all pixel, but it doesn't matter, because the graphic nature of some of those deaths was ridiculous. You're like, whoa.
Hey, my boobs are animated.
I mean, hey, look, I still have the hots for Fio, so back up.
Whatever. But, I wanted to jump into something real quick. You were just about to talk about the marketing behind the Neo Geo. But that is actually, to me, one of the things that I remember the most about the 16-bit era was how intense the marketing strategy is from both Nintendo to Sega to Neo Geo. In fact, Neo Geo was probably a hell of a lot more aggressive than Sega was. If I recall, I've seen several ads. There's two of them that stand out the most. The first one is, you need to pair these to play these. In case in point, 2 steel balls sitting next to each other. And then the other ad was this really hot model standing in lingerie stating, he used to never keep his hands off of me until we got that damn system. And here's this dude sitting over here, standing for whatever reason holding the Neo Geo arcade stick, looking like, he's rocking the joystick real hard, the wrong way. But, like, that was aggressive.
That's not how you touch those.
No. But then again, Sega's was pretty bad too, because they had a 2D a 2D picture.
Blast processing.
Well, yeah, there was that. There's the blast processing. There was the infamous Sega does what Nintendo don't. I mean, I don't need to talk about that because we all know what the hell it's about at this point. But some of the other stuff, like the risque stuff they did, like they have this one where it looks like it's an arcade stick. It's on a dude's lap. It's perfectly centered, and the hand just claps right there. And they're saying you just have to move the joystick the right way, or something ludicrous and sexual. Like, this is the 90s. It's all about, edgy marketing and, being able to hit hard. Whereas Nintendo, on the other hand, they didn't give a shit. They just are like, hey, now you're playing with power, super power. Look at our games. They have tons of colors. They have great sound. They play great. They just focused on what it was that made their games and their system great. Mm-hmm. And they never took. I don't think they've ever really taken pot shots at Sega or even Neo Geo, because to them, I mean, let's be honest. If we look at it in the long term,
the Donkey Kong Country market.
I don't remember the Donkey Kong marketing.
God, that was
to be truthfully
so
honest,
good.
but go ahead, Mark, please.
They would show off like what Donkey Kong Country could do, and they'd be like, it would be like not 32X. Like, not 32-bit, and they were, like, specifically dunking on, like, Sony and Sega with the Donkey Kong Country stuff.
Oh, yeah.
And I'm like, yeah, it's a shame that Donkey Kong Country was a shitty game, but whatever.
I mean, that's subjective.
That's subjective, very much.
That's, like, honestly, Donkey Kong Country is a 50-50 game. You either love it or you hate it, because that's just where it was in the spec. But keep in mind, though, there are a lot of games that came out around the same time, within like a 1 to 2 year span of time. There is no middle ground for any of the games, literally any of them. They were all really well received, or all absolutely just shit on. So, and that's on both major systems. That was both on Genesis and on Super Nintendo.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so, I really do think that Donkey Kong Country is very much a product of its time.
Yes,
and
yes,
I think
I would agree.
It's definitely a game that gets by more on its visuals than on having like amazing play.
Mm-hmm.
And the fact that like Donkey Kong Country kind of sort of like mostly the people who love it in this day and age are people who love it for the retro value and speedrunners.
I mean, you're not wrong.
Like you're not going to see it held up like Super Mario Brothers. You know what I'm saying? It doesn't.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't get that level of respect.
Let's also just lump in a couple of other games with that too, like I don't know, Banjo-Kazooie.
Well, except Banjo-Kazooie.
That said, I do
sure.
feel like it's kind of unfortunate that the TurboGrafx like gets like no love in general, because I had one for a little while, and
I played
it.
Game.
Yeah, it wasn't great, but there were some fun-ass games for that platform.
There were, most of which were all platformer games, which I thought was great, because that was like if you wanted good, solid, unique platforming, you had a TurboGrafx 16. Like, that was it. But I'll be completely, and I mean completely honest, when I say that I only ever played one game on that system.
Splatterhouse?
No, Bonks.
Fair.
I was going to say Bonk as well. I mean, that's probably my only real exposure to the TurboGrafx 16 outside of some ads.
I played a bunch of games on that. I actually did not play a Bonk game for many years. I was
love to go back and play it again. I'd love to go back and actually try TurboGrafx games out, honestly, because I never actually got exposed to it. Because at the time, like, I was either playing Super Nintendo or I was playing Genesis, or at the time, even then, like Sega CD and like stepping up into like maybe Nintendo 64 stuff, like around that era. Like, I never touched the TurboGrafx 16. I had a friend who owned one, and the only game I ever played on it was Bonks, and that was it. And I played that for like 15 minutes. It got super frustrated, but I was also like 14 and had no attention span, so it's like, I don't know.
Fair.
But yeah, like, I mean, I would love to go back. There's a lot of games and a lot of systems that I missed because I just never got a chance to play on. And I would love to get a chance to actually go back and play some of these games. Like, so this sort of speaks to just my exposure to just consoles in general, because like I basically went Super Nintendo, Genesis, Sega CD, Saturn, Dreamcast, Then I went back to play stuff on 64 because I had friends who owned them, which basically my extent I think was like Perfect Dark and GoldenEye.
Mhm.
Oh, and Super Mario, whatever. Super Mario 64. PlayStation 2, PlayStation 3, Xbox 360, PlayStation 4. But through most of the time from PS1 until now has predominantly been taken over by PC gaming. And that was purely just because I had the money, I had the game, the game library, and I had the will and capacity to want to play more on PC than I did on console. If friends were over, we played on console. If it was just me, I played on PC because that was how I was able to actually still connect with things. But in the grand scheme of things, there are other systems. So my exposure to TurboGrafx 16 was the extent of about 20 minutes at a friend's house. My exposure to the Philips CDI and the 3DO were at trade shows. not even like conventions. Like I'm talking like back wall booth at a normal trade convention for like a home and garden show.
Oh, my exposure to the Philips CDI in its entirety was waiting in the electronics section of Macy's while my mother would go shopping.
Oof.
Yeah, they would have a CDI on display there, and it was just the fucking Zelda games.
Yeah,
all the time it was the fucking Zelda games.
Wand of Gamelon.
My exposure to the CDI, and I am so happy my dad never bought into it because my dad loved technology and he almost would find ways of buying into it. But when my dad was in the Army, we lived on base in Frankfurt, Germany, and we would go to the AFIS Armed Forces store where the commissary and the PC was. They would have the electronics section, and of course, they would have the TVs and stuff like that. But in the TV section, they even had a guy standing there demoing the CDI for you, and the games that he was primarily showing off was like the Mario, not the Mario is Missing, but the one where he goes through the doors.
Okay, yeah. The one that Twitter has decided that it loves a lot and is using for strange memes. Yes, that one.
And some FMV anime looking games, and that's about it. I never saw the Zelda games, and I think that's a blessing, to be truthfully honest.
Let's be honest, those anime games on CDI were probably the only reason that system actually had a lifespan at all. Just saying.
Time Gal.
Yep.
Yeah. Time Gal.
Time Gal.
Which also came out on the Sega CD.
Mm-hmm.
Guess which one sold better?
Was good shit. Yeah, Time Gal was good shit though. I don't care.
I'm thinking about getting that. I mean, as a collector's piece. I mean, it looked like a fun game. So I mean,
it's fucking Dragon's Lair. So if you like Dragon's Lair, there you go.
Of course, yeah.
It's Dragon's Lair with more titties.
Yeah, boobies.
Yeah, and 17 titties fall out.
Yay!
Look, we can all agree we all three like titties. That's just the way it works.
Yeah,
basically.
So that makes me want to go back to the point that I wanted to talk about earlier, which was the rise of the ESRB during the 16-bit era, and how it pretty much made Nintendo look slightly edgier back when they released Mortal Kombat 2 because oh hey, Sega's kicking our ass because they had the blood code. You're telling me?
What are you talking about? No. Sega held the edge from pretty much the inception of the ESRB, and they never let it go. So much so that the blood is still probably flowing from the random open wounds even today, even though they're not a console company anymore.
Oh yeah.
Sega themselves held on so hard to the edge of the ESRB outside of what Nintendo did. Nintendo was a squeaky clean baby compared to what Sega was doing at the time. Even Sony, when they first stepped into the market, Battle Arena Toshinden, okay? I'm just saying, not even remotely close to what Nintendo was doing. Yes, they had a little bit of blood here and there with Mortal Kombat 2, but let's be honest, that was at a very low point and a very hesitant point on Nintendo's side, because they're like, what are we going to do? We might actually not have as much sales because we don't know if we can actually sell the Nintendo 64 now that the Super Nintendo's not the hot ticket anymore.
But at the same time, though, you have to say it's not with just Mortal Kombat 2 that helped. I mean, they had, Killer Instinct. They had, a bunch of other violent games that, they probably wouldn't have approved otherwise if Sega didn't, start, pushing the boundaries a little bit with some of their games.
The original KI on Super Nintendo did not have half of the actual fatalities that the actual arcade version had on the Super Nintendo, and they didn't actually even have 2 specific fatalities that were in the arcade games on both KI and KI2 on either of their home consoles. They were completely removed from the game's code when they were actually ported over, and that was B Orchids.
Oh, the titty one.
Yep.
Actually, the flashing death is in the Super Nintendo version.
Right, but it's different than the arcade version. And Maya in KI2 had a bloodier version of her finisher on the arcade than she did on the Nintendo 64 version. Those were both toned down dramatically because of the ESRB rating, because ESRB flat out said that they were going to give KI2 on the 64 an M rating, and Nintendo said, yeah, no, and completely removed it from the game's code, and in order to maintain the T rating that game actually got when it came out.
And yet the only way they had to maintain a teen rating for the Turok game was make the blood green.
Yeah, but you're killing dinosaurs from the past.
The thing that amuses me endlessly is that the ESRB thing is something that has followed Nintendo around ever since.
Mm-hmm.
Ever since. Like, Nintendo is known as the baby company for babies. They make the baby video games for the babies.
For the kiddies.
And it's they make kiddie shit. Whenever something comes out of Nintendo that has like blood and violence, and people are like, "Oh my god, Nintendo's making this kind of thing," and I'm like, guys. Nintendo fucking bankrolled Eternal Darkness, for Christ's sake.
Mm-hmm.
But it's because of the ESRB thing. Like, Sega did not win the 16-bit console.
Oh, hell no. They lost 2-1.
No. Not quite 2-1, but they were winning for a number of years, but they basically, the last 2 years of the Genesis was them making every bad mistake possible. Like, just fucking themselves, like fist fucking themselves in the butt, King of Iron Fist tournament style. So it's they could have won, they didn't. Whatever. But Nintendo walked out of that war with the moniker of being the baby console maker for babies. Like, they are a joke at this point. Even today, people who still people love Nintendo, sure, but many people still regard Nintendo as the baby console for babies. They're the baby company who makes the baby games. And all because of fucking Mortal Kombat. Jesus Christ.
Yeah.
I mean, so, like, a lot of it really comes down to the fact, though, that, like, can we just be honest with ourselves? The only reason the ESRB even exists is purely because of the fact that a bunch of moms got together and realized that their kids were trying to emulate certain aspects of the video games, and they thought that was bad because good Christian people don't do that.
Oh, sure, but that's been every major moral panic ever.
I mean, let's be honest.
For every form of medium, it's been like that. I mean, comic books, it took them forever, and they're still getting shit on from mom and pop groups.
Yeah, you remember D&D in the 80s? Jesus Christ.
Oh, yeah, D&D. Kids are practicing wizardry and Satanism or something in their basements.
As your children are dragged deeper and deeper into the bowels of El Diablo. When somebody as popular at the time as Dr. Demento was to actually make a skit specifically about that and make it as satirical and comedic as possible in the process, and still, to this day, have that much popularity.
I want to cast magic missile on the darkness. Yes, you can virtually slap me from the back.
Anyone want one?
Yeah.
Are there
when
any
you see your
chicks
mom
in the
this
bar?
weekend, be sure and tell her Satan.
Oh. Oh my god, I remember that song. Oh, that's good shit. Oh, that's good shit. I missed that. Teddy, what does regret mean?
Yeah, well, it's better to regret something you have done than to regret something you haven't done.
Oh, if you see your mother this weekend, be sure to tell us that that song was
fucking orbital.
I love that. That was actually my introduction to like industrial like techno and stuff too. So it was kind of creepy.
So,
I'm just gonna wrap my own shit up because at this point it's like I get it. Like where I came from and where you guys came from are easily two totally different places because you guys seem to kind of come from kind of like the same points and like I am just like I nosedived headlong into the 16-bit era because I had no idea what to expect. I was so into it at that point that I just kept playing whatever I could get my hands on. And a lot of it was really more a matter of not so much what I wanted to play, but more along the lines of what I thought would be fun to try to play. And like I had subscriptions to Nintendo Power and Game Pro and EGM and whatever. Like I got all my hands on as much of the media as I could possibly get my hands on because at the time that was like my life. Because again, only child who grew up in a cul-de-sac full of retirees and old people. I didn't have a lot of kids in my life when I was that much. So for me, being able to put myself into that kind of a position where I can just keep looking at stuff and like knowing more about what was actually going on in the video game world meant that I could still have conversations at school with the other kids and not get laughed at. So for me, that was a good thing. And it just kept getting bigger and bigger and bigger to a point where like I can obsess over like specific things, like knowing full well that there are still games to this day that get me excited about actually wanting to play them and not so much what I'm playing them on speaks volumes to not just what's actually out there. Like, okay, Cyberpunk 2077 is going to be fucking phenomenal. Thank you, CD Projekt Red, for not being fuckos and actually making a game that I am so absolutely just in awe of right now that you have made me feel like I am a 12-year-old kid reading a fucking GamePro going, holy crap, that looks awesome! Like, seriously, they released the 48-minute, like, playable trailer
gameplay
thing.
Just the 15 minutes alone was enough to just win me over.
Wow, I'm fucking sold. I cannot fucking wait for this game. Like, Witcher is great, don't get me wrong. I love the Witcher trilogy. I thought they did a fantastic job with it. The fact that when they announced that they were finally going to be releasing Cyberpunk 2077 by basically doing this weird infectious thing at the very end of E3 and then literally spamming, I think it was 10,000 free codes for the Witcher 3 Collector's Edition in the actual advertisement for this game during E3, and the only way you would know is you actually went back and watched the VOD and paused to try to read what was on the screen, only to realize that that's what those were. Yeah. This is a company that I'm willing to not only support, but also keep my mind behind because I'm like, all right, not only have you guys shown and proven on multiple occasions that you guys know what the fuck you're doing, but now you're bringing back this level of nostalgia for the pen and paper games that I used to play when I was that age to a point where I'm like, I'm fucking sold.
The Cyberpunk games of pen and paper yesteryear, like Shadowrun.
Cyberpunk, Shadowrun, Netrunner, you tell me, like, sci-fi has been, like, my jam for almost 2 decades. So, like, I've always wanted a solid MMO that revolved around a sci-fi universe that wasn't just absolutely shit on in the first 6 months. Fucking looking at you, NCSoft. And I've always wanted to be able to not just that, but, like, to enjoy a good, like, solid Shadowrun experience, Cyberpunk experience in general. Harebrained Schemes has saved fucking Shadowrun, and I will say this, they have fucking done a really good job with Battletech, and I am fucking stoked for the expansion. Just putting that out there.
Thumbs up for that from me as well.
But let's also not forget the fact that Microsoft allowed fuck all who it was to make that first-person shooter through third-person, whatever, I was so upset. I was so upset. You have no idea how upset I was about that game. I wanted that. I was like,
Shadowrun reboot.
"Ooh, it's a first-person shooter game. It plays like whatever TF2. It's fucking great." No, it's fucking garbage. I was so upset. I was so upset. I took the whole case, game and everything. I just snapped that son of a bitch in half. I was so pissed at that game. I was so upset. I don't get that kind of like that level of upset about video games in general. Like, I don't rage. That game is one of the only games in my entire playing game existence that I've ever done that with. There are only 2 times I've ever like raged at a video game. That was one of them, because it was just that bad.
Yeah.
But if we're talking nostalgia, that's my nostalgia. I can't wait for that game. I can't believe that we actually got a chance to talk about this, and I'm really stoked about what's going to be coming up next, because there's at least 3 or 4 other franchises that have reboots in their future very soon, and I'm like, all right, fucking slap me in the face with it, because I'll probably buy them regardless of how good or bad they are, because I love those franchises.
Okay. Before we, call it a night, let's do a couple things. I wanted to get, your closing thoughts, Mark, before we end the night. And why don't we name like our 5, favorite games or games that are close to us that we hold, pretty near and dear from, the Genesis, Super Nintendo, Neo Geo era, 16-bit era of gaming. So, Mark, please.
I don't really know that I have any closing thoughts as such. The 16-bit era had a lot of great games, and it was, I think, very formative to all of our gaming experiences, for sure.
Mm-hmm.
I love the time that I spent playing games during it. I love the experiences that I had with it. As far as like a top 5 goes,
I mean, if you can't think of anything, like...
There's just so many goddamn good games out of it. If I, just off the top of my head, I'm gonna say Phantasy Star 4, Snatcher, Final Fantasy 6, King of Fighters 97 probably would have like come out like right at the tail end of that. Shining Force.
Yeah. Good choice.
Yeah, my closing thoughts is that looking back at the 16-bit era, which is, for us, a period of time that made us, the true hardcore gamers that we are. I mean, despite the fact that we had, exposure to the NES Master System, Atari ST, gaming computer, the Amiga, Commodore Amiga 500, all these older consoles, Coleco, Atari 2600. It was the 16-bit era that really solidified us because it showed true growth in the gaming industry and what it had to offer. Not knowing, of course, what was on the horizon with the game, with the, like the PlayStation and Saturn and Nintendo 64 coming out later in the decade of the 90s. We had some memorable franchises that, to this day are still going, some of which probably should be dead by now. I mean, Sonic. But some of them I'm just happy are still good. Some of them...
Sonic Mania and its DLC are fucking a pleasure to play, and you will fight me for that. That is a really
I actually agree with you. To be truthfully honest, if Sonic Mania hadn't come out, I would have really fought really hard to just say, you know what, Sega, you done fucked up. You've tried to reboot this franchise several times. Just give it up. But Sonic Mania was good.
The thing that really gets me about Sonic Mania is it wasn't even a Sega internal game. It was a fucking fan game that got endorsed by Sega and then basically got made because Sega put their money behind it because enough people around the internet were like, we want that one, not that one. We want the 2D one back, the one with Sonic and Tails and Knuckles, and I guess you could put in the other guys because they're not terrible and the extra levels are kind of awesome and the music is fucking fantastic, and thank you for that soundtrack because it was really good.
Yeah. But...
And then they were like, hey, make your own Sonic Persona too, guys. No! Nobody in their right... Maybe the furry community, but no one else in their right mind wants to make a Sonic Persona.
Let's vent about that in the next episode if you want. But other closing thoughts. I mean, if anything, out of all the gaming generations, besides the fact that I think I look back on the the 120-bit era of gaming quite a bit. Hi, Jesus. Besides maybe say the Dreamcast, PS2, and the original Xbox and GameCube, I would say the 16-bit era is the one I look back on fondest of most. I loved the Sega CD. I loved my Genesis. I loved playing the Super Nintendo at my friend's house. Even though I never owned one, I loved the games. They just encapsulated so much of my imagination back then, and it just blew my mind. So for like my top 5 games that I could probably not top 5, but like just 5 random games from that era that really like I enjoyed. Sonic 3 and Knuckles was one of my favorites. Snatcher on the Sega CD was just absolutely amazing for what it was. It was actually my first Cyberpunk game that really blew my mind and got me really into the genre of like just Cyberpunk anything in general. Super Mario World, I mean, that game is a staple. It's amazing no matter what. I would probably have to, as weird as it is, some of the sports games we had back then were a lot of fun, and I'm going to point to NBA Jam Tournament Edition because I can't talk about how fun that was to play with friends. That was one of those party games. You got people to actually come over and play. Another game that during this era that was great, Street Fighter 2. In all its iterations across the Genesis and Super Nintendo. I mean, I really absolutely enjoyed it. I had friends who would come over and play that as well. We had a blast. It was a great thing. And I guess my last game I will talk about is quite possibly an oddity, but again, probably the first RPG by Epic that I played outside of Dragon Quest, and that was, the 7th Saga, which is, to this day, believe it or not, it kind of does still stand the test of time as an RPG. As archaic and as hard as a game it is, it still works. And I would like to maybe see a revival of it someday. Or Enix, Enix, not Epic. I don't know what the hell I'm saying.
If they're going to revive it, it'd be great if they could make it actually work the way that it's supposed to in the U.S. That'd be nice.
Yeah. Instead of that, end game bug where you can get fucked royally if you don't go in prepared.
Yeah.
They had a sequel too as well, but it never came overseas. But unfortunately, that's it for me. For these games that really stand out for me. How about you, Jan?
Top 5. Mega Man X, Gunstar Heroes. God, I played a lot of Gunstar Heroes. Love the hell out of that game. It's a really good game, and I really would love to see something new in that franchise. But what are you gonna do? I mean, for being the fact that it's still technically an offshoot of what was the medieval one that they had that was kind of like it?
Guardian Heroes.
Yeah,
Thank
the one
you.
on Saturn. Yeah.
For being the fact that it was basically the far future in the same universe as that one. Like, okay, I'm cool with that.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, no, Gunstar Heroes was like my jam on the Genesis. I love that game so much.
Well, considering all the revivals that we're seeing at this point for like Wonder Boy and Streets of Rage, who knows?
Mm-hmm.
Boy, I would scream my head off. Like if that would do me really well. I would enjoy that a lot if they actually were.
I would. Yeah, I would shit just everywhere. I would pee on everything.
Oh my!
Damn it, Mark.
Thanks, Mark.
Gosh, I mean, so Mega Man X, Gunstar Heroes. I guess Final Fantasy VI. Chrono Trigger is definitely kind of in that list because, let's be honest, that was kind of its own. It's still its own beast. Let's just be honest. gosh, I'd probably have to say like, and this is kind of an offshoot, but I'd have to say that out of all of the other games, that like Dark Wizard, like it's such just
Dark Wizard. Dark Wizard's a very good game.
It is.
Gosh,
I really like that game.
So you have to understand though. So Dark Wizard for me is kind of like twofold because it was a game that was strategy, which like I've always been into that kind of thing, which is like why I am such a. Okay, look, it is no like secret that I have like the biggest fucking lady boner for Final Fantasy Tactics, just in general. Mark knows all about it, especially when I'm like when they announced when they announced in 14 that they were doing Ivalice as the Alliance dungeons, Alliance raid.
Robin Oster and Rita Rana, yeah.
Mwah, fucking beautiful. Like Mark knows, everyone in the other Discord knows. Anyway, so Dark Wizard for me hit that button, but at the same time was also around the same time that I had just started really getting into anime. Mm-hmm. So like the fact that all of the cutscenes were animated and voiced and were all anime style and was a tactics-based game. Oh. Yes, please. Mm-hmm. So like it to me that was like easily one of my biggest games of that entire just that chunk of time, purely just because it hit all of the right buttons for me. And so because it was able to do all of that and still be able to hold like 1, 2, 3, 4. There was 5 different main characters that you could play throughout the entirety of the game, which means there were 5 different endings. And I'm like, sold. I've got 650 hours plus on that game for all 5 endings, purely because I went back and I actually went through for every single character to make sure that not only did I have the strongest army, but I also had the epic weapon for each of the 5 generals, because that's just how much that game made it rewarding for you to go and get that kind of stuff. And that was like a far cry from a lot of the games at that time, because 90% of the games that were in that late 90s era were all one and done.
Well, I mean, it's also worth noting that like a lot of the really great games that came out during that time period have kind of been eclipsed by 32-bit versions of themselves. Mm-hmm. Like Dark Wizard is a good game, but you do kind of have to remember that while it's not necessarily the same game, Dragon Force kind of does everything that it does better.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
The Lunar games were eclipsed by their Sony PlayStation versions.
I take offense to how they changed Luna, personally, because I didn't quite like how there were certain aspects of her personality that became a little subdued in the PlayStation version versus what she was in the Sega CD version. But let's also understand that the Sega CD version and Crystal Dynamics, they actually came out and said, or Working Dynamics, excuse me. Working Dynamics actually came out and said... Working Designs, thank you. Why does it say Dynamic? I don't know what I'm thinking about. I'm thinking Tomb Raider.
Dynamics were pretty big back then.
I'm thinking about fucking Tomb Raider, thank you.
Yeah.
Working Designs actually came out and said that the original Lunar Silver Star story was actually rushed. They actually had 3 months of canceled production time because they basically got flat out told by Game Arts, you have to release it this time, because they were competing with no, they were competing with Chrono Trigger. Yeah. They had to release the game on time before Chrono Trigger came out, and so they actually stated that there was conceptual stuff that they had to nix and cutting room, which is why Lunar, the original Lunar on Sega CD.
Chrono Trigger came out in 1995.
It came out
94. 94. Lunar came out in 93, about the same time, about just months after the Sega CD launched. And Lunar 2 Eternal Blue came out in 1995, I believe, during the death throes of the Sega CD. But to be truthfully honest, I think that's a good spot where we should end this discussion for now. I mean, I would love to talk about the Lunar and Working Designs thing, as a matter of fact, on the next podcast, if you guys actually are open to that. That actually sounds like a fun topic.
Sure, we could talk about Working Designs for fucking ever. Jesus Christ.
I know.
Good and terrible decisions that they make. Jesus
Absolutely.
Lunar... Where is it? Hold on, I'm trying to figure it out. Anyway, go on.
Yeah.
Yeah, Joel came over, was like, you like Gun Griffin Blood.
Yes.
You're cutting out. Yeah, Gun Griffin.
Yes.
Fucking Gun Griffin plays. Jesus Christ.
Mm-hmm. All right. Well, as we round up the show, I want to thank everybody for tuning in. This is GVN Live. Thursday night's going to be my 3 Vets and a Noob, and we are playing through the wonderful world of Phantasy Star Online 2, which has been quite fun for our noob, who is just literally being wowed like a kid in a candy shop everywhere he goes. He's like, oh, wow, look at this flashy thing. Oh, wow, look at that flashy thing going on. Jan, you're streaming pretty regularly now, aren't you?
I am. I'm actually doing it pretty much every day now. I wasn't going to stream on Sundays. Last Sunday was kind of an exception. Pretty much it's still kind of in the air. I may not be doing Saturday, Sundays. As of right now, I do know that at least Monday through Friday, pretty much from 7 to like 11 is kind of my slot right now.
Mm-hmm.
Like I said, there's still a couple of days that are kind of tentative, as I'm kind of still working out some scheduling things with specific people. They know who they are. And until I get to that point, I'm not entirely sure exactly which days, but it should be at least 5 days a week.
Okay.
A lot of that is purely in the essence of I am literally this freaking close to getting affiliate, and I am pretty much just kind of hammering it home trying to get there. So at this point, it's just a matter of getting the views. We'll get there.
Okay.
But yeah, it's like I said, I'm pretty much going pretty much 5 days a week.
All right, and Mark, are you going to be streaming your tabletop gaming session this Saturday?
Of course. I will be streaming tabletop this Saturday. I don't know what we're playing yet. It's maybe going to be Black Orchestra, maybe going to be Kingdom Death. I don't know. We'll figure it out. I'm like pretty close to doing it. Going to be streaming Spider-Man starting on Friday when I get it. Just to, show it off and whatnot. And, if people want to see it through, maybe I'll do it again on Sunday. I don't know. We'll see.
Okay. And to get to everybody's channel here, I mean, you can see my stuff on this channel. You look at their Twitter names. Their Twitter names are exactly the same as their channel names. So Mark B. Writing is the Twitch channel. Excalibur, my GHT is Jan's channel. So definitely check us out when we are streaming something that isn't a talk show and boring you to hell.
I also been